Hello, welcome to History 101, Lecture 19, Sectionalism. If you're in your textbook, the OpenStax textbook, this lecture coincides with Chapter 14. If you're using the ushistory.org notes, it's Chapter 28 and then 30 to 32. At the end of the last lecture, we saw the United States had won the northern half of Mexico from Mexico in the Mexican-American War from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. We also had a very small cliffhanger that was overshadowed with the victory in the Mexican-American War. In December of 1847, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. Here we are, 1848, 1849. Congress, excited about the prospect of organizing the West politically, was fairly confident that it would be decades before any territory out west reached the population necessary to become a state, and thus delaying the issue of slavery. The California Gold Rush of 1849 dispelled that excitement that, hey, there'd be decades before we have to worry about arguing about slavery out west. Estimated 50,000 people raced west to California to participate in the California Gold Rush. In 1850, California applied for statehood to the Union as a free state. This is a political cartoon during the 1850s, as the issue of slavery and organizing the West politically consumed more and more of Congress's time. Tempers would regularly flare, and this is one of them. Just like Missouri needed a compromise to enter the Union in 1820, California is a controversial issue, and it will also need a compromise to get into the Union. This symbolizes or signifies how big of an issue slavery had become, to the point where now states, in order to get into the Union, now need a compromise, now need political back-dealing to get into the Union. The term you want to know for the Compromise of 1850 is this: popular sovereignty. Conceived by Senator Stephen A. Douglas, senator from Illinois. Popular sovereignty was an attempt by Congress to give the territories out west the burden or right, or however you want to put it, the burden of arguing about slavery, letting them decide for themselves whether they want slavery or not, to take the heat off of Congress. Rather than Congress argue about it, we'll have you people out west. You'll decide whether you want slavery or not. Here's the Compromise of 1850. The architect of the Compromise of 1850 is Henry Clay, and that would be interesting to many of us. Some of you may have wondered, or may have asked the question when you see this, is he still alive? And he is. He will actually die during the debate, not actually on the Senate or House of Representatives floor, but during the debates over the compromise, he'll become ill, go home, and he'll pass away. Henry Clay, the architect of 1850, having saved the country in 1820, Henry Clay is confident he can do so again. This could be an example of the famous phrase or famous saying, "It's better to die a hero than live long enough to become a villain." And we see the results of the Compromise of 1850. You may go, maybe it was a good thing Henry Clay went out a hero, rather than suffer the opprobrium of having the stain of the Compromise of 1850 stuck on him. Other senators, so once Representative Henry Clay died, other congressmen and senators, like Senator Stephen A. Douglas, will carry the torch for the Commonwealth of 1850. So divisive is the issue, so difficult is it to pass this compromise as a whole. The architects of the Compromise of 1850, after having Clay, have to pass each part of the compromise as amendments to other bills to get through. These are the parts of the Compromise of 1850. California will enter the Union as a free state. Northerners are ecstatic. This now permanently puts out of balance the number of free and slave states. Southerners are upset that a free state has joined the Union and not a corresponding slave state came in. There's no other area in the United States at the time or for the foreseeable future where you could create a slave state. This will permanently put out of balance the number of free and slave states. Territorial governments are organized in New Mexico and Utah. New Mexico and Utah territory will be created, and they will be allowed to have popular sovereignty. In other words, they will pick whether they want slavery or not. For Nevada, Northern Nevada will be put into Utah territory, and Southern Nevada, Clark County, where we are, will be part of New Mexico territory. So a little bit of Nevada history there for you. We will begin our political journey in the United States partly in Utah territory or New Mexico territory. Northerners, when they find out about this compromise, Northerners are aghast, abolitionists enraged. As we've talked about like a broken record in class, restricting slavery out west is the majority point of view, is the baseline, mainstream point of view for Northerners. No slavery out west. Once again, Congress compromises on it and says, well, we'll let people out west decide. Popular sovereignty allows for the expansion of slavery out west. The slave trade is abolished in the District of Columbia. Senators and congressmen in the North view this as a win because many are tired of walking through Washington, D.C., by slave markets and slave auctions, something they find personally offensive. Southerners by the 1850s become upset, enraged, aghast at even the thought of restricting slavery. Any restriction on slavery is a slippery slope to worse outcomes, which from the Southern point of view would be the abolition of slavery. And then a new Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which commits the federal government to helping slaves be returned back south. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 puts teeth in enforcement power that previous enforced law fugitive slave acts have. Southerners feel like finally the federal government is going to protect the property rights of its citizens, while Northerners are upset that they will have to participate in a process repatriating slaves back south, something they find objectionable. Here's a map. You can look over the southern states where slavery is legal. You can see the creation of Utah and New Mexico territory where California is. You can see the free states and territories. So you kind of see what the U.S. looks like in 1850. Okay, Utah and New Mexico territory have popular sovereignty. California will be a free state. Unlike the Compromise of 1820, no one is happy with the Compromise of 1850. Go read the editorials, newspaper editorials, letters of the editor, diaries, journal letters after the Compromise of 1850. Both sides of the slavery issue argue that they have compromised too much. We've lost. Both sides feel like they've lost. Both sides feel that they gave up way too much to the other side to get what little crumbs that they got. So unlike the Compromise of 1820, where Henry Clay comes out a hero, there are no politicians are viewed as heroes this time. Although interestingly enough, Stephen A. Douglas who after Henry Clay is the main proponent of the Compromise of 1850, just like Henry Clay, hoped to turn the Compromise of 1820 into a presidential win. Stephen A. Douglas hopes to do so as well. The only problem is Clay was praised for the Compromise of 1820. Douglas will be roundly condemned for the Compromise of 1850. Like we said a minute ago, the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 puts enforcement teeth into the Fugitive Slave Act, which previous slave acts didn't have. Previously, when slave catchers went north to recapture their slaves, often and easily Northerners could help these African American individuals escape slavery by evading these slave catchers. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 requires citizens to report runaway slaves to a slave catcher and to a local judge should a judge be helping find the slave. There is now, with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, there are now fines and jail time. There are now fines and jail time for helping slaves escape. Judges are given rewards for returning runaway slaves back south. So now there's a financial incentive to return slaves back south. Several states like Michigan, New York, and Massachusetts passed what's called personal liberty laws to contradict or counteract the Federal Fugitive Slave Act, thus setting up a constitutional issue. Personal liberty laws gave immediate residency status to escaped slaves. They immediately were free. They were immediately citizens of that state. So when a slave catcher caught up with them in the said state, he would not be capturing his property. He would be kidnapping a resident of the state. So, whereas the Federal Fugitive Slave Act, in some ways, is criminalizing abolitionism, helping slaves escape, these personal liberty laws are criminalizing a slave catcher trying to get his slaves back, trying to get slaves back south. So these personal liberty laws set up a constitutional issue. And we've talked about this several times before in class, that the tension between federal laws and state laws, that doctrine of nullification. Is nullification of a federal law a legitimate constitutional check on federal power? These personal liberty laws set up that constitutional conflict where states are trying to circumvent the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. Let's go to 1852. Harry Beecher Stowe, the famous Beecher family. We've talked about them before, a whole family of reformers. Harry Beecher Stowe, she writes a book in 1852 called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a fictional work. Harry Beecher Stowe interviewed former slaves and abolitionists who had knowledge or experience with slaves to develop the stories and the narrative of Uncle Tom's Cabin. The narrative of Uncle Tom's Cabin shows the evils of slavery and the evils of the Fugitive Slave Act. And this book was meant to counteract the growing number of defenses of slavery that you see published in the 1840s and 50s. You'd have books arguing that slavery was beneficial. It was a civilizing influence on the African American population. It was paternalistic, meaning there are children, we're taking care of them. We treat our slaves kindly like we treat our children kindly. They're happy to be our slaves. Uncle Tom's Cabin was meant to counteract that narrative by showing slavery as not a paternalistic parent-child relationship where slaves are happy to serve their masters and masters are happy to civilize their children or raise their children. It showed the brutal evils of slavery. The book is popular in the North, obviously hated in the South. Several states even banned its distribution in the South. One interesting thing about Uncle Tom's Cabin is it became a bestseller in Europe. American books didn't sell in Europe back then. 19th century. For some 19th century Europeans, they weren't sure Americans could read. So for this book to become popular in Europe shows the impact of the book. It became very popular in Europe. The significance of the book, an apocryphal story. The story goes that during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, invited her to the White House. The story goes when he met her, he didn't say hello. He shook her hand and said, "So you're the little lady that started this Civil War, this President War, not Civil, but this President War." So an apocryphal story about maybe how influential it was. The goal of Uncle Tom's Cabin was to move you as a Northerner from an anti-slavery to an abolitionist position. You're supposed to be an abolitionist after this book. Harriet Beecher Stowe and the Beecher family are abolitionists. They're not anti-slavery. This book was meant for you to move from being comfortable anti-slavery to actively opposing slavery, be an abolitionist. Bloody Kansas, or as I say in class, so you thought Kansas was boring. Let's go to 1854. Stephen A. Douglas, senator from Illinois, proposes the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay. I mentioned this in class last week, but a lot of you weren't there because obviously I was ill and I didn't want you to get sick. But I made the joke. I asked the class on a scale of 1 to Henry Clay, how badly does Stephen A. Douglas want to be president? And he wants to be president about as badly as Henry Clay. So Henry Clay. And so this is why, when Henry Clay died, this is why Stephen A. Douglas took up the mantle of the Comrades of 1850. He was hoping to follow Henry Clay's path to an attempted presidential run, but hopefully doing better than Henry Clay. So Stephen A. Douglas, 1854, senator from Illinois, Democrat. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to create Kansas and Nebraska territory. The thing you need to know is Kansas and Nebraska territory are both north of the Compromise 1820 line, 3630, which says no slavery north of 3630 except for Missouri. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, though, will allow Kansas and Nebraska territory to decide if they want slavery, thus having popular sovereignty. I'll let you guess what will happen. I'll let you guess what happens when Northern anti-slavery and abolitionist activists read the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Not only does the Kansas-Nebraska Act compromise over slavery, allow it to go west with popular sovereignty, from their point of view, it violates the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise in 1820 says no slavery north of 3630 except for Missouri. Well, here, 3 decades later, you have Congress in some ways invalidating the Compromise of 1820 by saying, well, we'll let Kansas and Nebraska decide whether they want slavery out west. Okay, here's a map for you so you can kind of see where Kansas and Nebraska is. Kansas, Nebraska, there's the 3630 line. Okay. Missouri. So, for anti-slavery and abolitionists, for anti-slavery activists and abolitionist activists, there's no slavery north of 3630 except for Missouri. In other words, Kansas and Nebraska territory shouldn't have a choice. It is free. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act says what? Well, we'll let them decide through popular sovereignty. So we have a rush to Kansas. In 1855 and 56, abolitionists and pro-slavery groups and people raced to settle Kansas by the thousands and tens of thousands. Some abolition groups pay people to move to Kansas. The goal is to have more voters in the territory for your side. So when there are elections, your side will win and control the the territorial legislatures. And then when you have a constitutional convention to create a state government or a state constitution, you can make your side pro or free or slave depending on how many voters you have. There are two territorial elections between 1855 and 1857. There are two territorial elections over the course of those couple of years. It turns out a pro-slavery legislature is elected both times, and so that's unfortunate from the northern point of view. Not enough not enough anti-slavery people moved to Kansas to keep it a free territory. There is a constitutional convention election that will be held to try to make Kansas a state. A slight pro-slavery majority is elected for that as well. Did anti-slavery elected officials or candidates say, darn it, and go home? No, what ends up happening is the losers in those territorial elections just set up their own legislature. So all of a sudden, by 1857, you have two territorial legislatures in Kansas, both passing legislation for the territory, a pro-slavery one and an anti-slavery one. So it creates political chaos in the territory, as it's like, well, which territorial legislature do you follow? And so you have some chaos there, as competing legislatures either abolish slavery or protect slavery. So it's like, who do you side with? To move ahead of the story, before I talk about the violence, it is bleeding Kansas, so you guys are wanting some blood. But 1858, let's go a little bit ahead of the story, just so I can finish it, and then we'll come back. In 1858, the pro-slavery Constitutional Convention in Kansas will adopt and send to Congress the Lecompton Constitution. Lecompton is the city or town that this pro-slavery territorial legislature met. The Lecompton Constitution is the pro-slavery Constitution of Kansas. Okay, and it gets sent to Congress. President James Buchanan, Democrat James Buchanan, supports the Lecompton Constitution. He encourages its passage to get it in. But here's a dramatic thing. It fails in Congress. The Lecompton Constitution does not pass Congress. For the first time, a territory trying to join the Union doesn't get in. It's kept out. Then you're going, well, Mr. Bills, there's a compromise, just like Missouri and California. No. This is how far things have escalated in the debate over slavery and slavery out west. No one's willing to compromise anymore. Compromise is giving up too much to the other side. Opinions have hardened. And are not going to be moved or changed. And so there's no compromise in 1858 to get Kansas in the Union. We see how big of an issue has slavery become. Slavery has become such an issue that it's kept the territory out of the Union. Kansas won't join the Union until the Civil War starts, and 11 southern states leave, opening up the ability for northern free states to have enough votes to pass a free state constitution for Kansas. Over the course of 1856 and 1857, around 200 people will be killed through violence. This isn't an organized military war type of a thing. This is It's more like a vigilante mob. If you and your friends get together and you go start shooting just people you don't like. So pro-slavery people start looking for anti-slavery people and start shooting them. Anti-slavery people start shooting pro-slavery people. So it turns into kind of a mob war or a vigilante war or a gang war. Is just you just start shooting at people you don't like, and so about 200 people will be killed over the course of about a year. John Brown, we'll talk about him more later. He was an abolitionist. He's one of the reasons it's bleeding Kansas. He and his group of or posse or his group. One of the biggest issue, the biggest episode, will attack a small settlement of pro-slavery settlers and murder 5 people. Their crime, having an opinion. You think you can suck in own slaves. So here we have it. For a lot of historians, bleeding Kansas is a prelude to the Civil War. You have Northerners and Southerners shooting at each other, committing violence against each other over the issue of slavery. Probably the biggest event in bleeding Kansas is called the Sack of Lawrence. Northern newspapers really blew this up. The Sack of Lawrence, horrible attack on Lawrence, Kansas, an anti-slavery town by pro-slavery settlers. Northern newspapers kind of like the Boston Massacre did. So like the Boston Massacre is kind of overplayed to colonists. The Sack of Lawrence is kind of overplayed for Northern newspapers. But it is a group of pro-slavery settlers attack the small town of Lawrence, Kansas, start fires in some buildings, shoot a few people, tip over some cows, and so they attack the town. Is it the burning down of Carthage and salting the earth that the Romans did to Carthage? No, which is what Northern newspapers depicted it as. But it again just shows the violence, the escalation of violence in Kansas during 1856-57. Let me go back to slide. I should have had this slide first. This just shows you where some of the violence is. Major violent outbreaks. Lecompton, Topeka, Seward Lawrence's. So, yeah. Around the same time, you have of bleeding Kansas. You have a very gruesome kind of Senate fight. A U.S. Senator, an abolitionist U.S. Senator named Charles Sumner, Massachusetts, several days earlier had given a speech about anti-slavery and abolitionism. And some of his speech was aimed at a criticism of another senator, Andrew Butler of South Carolina. Butler had given a pro-slavery speech a few days before that, and Sumner's speech criticized it and got a little personal about Senator Butler of South Carolina. It just so happens that Senator Butler has a relative in the House of Representatives, a younger man named Preston Brooks. Preston Brooks is so incensed that his family's honor has been impugned by Senator Sumner's speech. He proceeds to come to the Senate chamber, look for Senator Sumner. Senator Sumner's at his desk in the Senate chamber, working or writing a letter, writing a speech, whatever. Preston Brooks goes up to him and takes out a cane and with a metal ball on top and proceeds to beat Senator Sumner to probably within an inch of his life. He gets beat pretty badly. Sumner is an older gentleman. It is somewhat lucky. He is so miraculous he survived the beating. Southers is fairly old, but he does survive. However, he will be out of the Senate for 2 years, trying to recuperate from the meeting. Preston Brooks, nothing happens to him. His constituents send him letters of congratulations for standing up for Southern honor. Some even send him another cane in case he broke the first one, or in case any other damn Yankees need a lesson in imputing a Southern gentleman's honor. So here's a political cartoon at the time, kind of showing it's obviously it's a northern one, kind of the anti-Southern one. You know, this is Southern chivalry. You know, beat your opponent senseless, and so there's that. But we're done with the Free Soil Party in a minute. This is a political cartoon from that era. The Free Soil Party looks at Democrats and Whigs as both incapable and or unwilling to restrict slavery out west. And so the Free Soilers are gathering together, a lot of Northerners who feel this way. They send their senators to Congress and their representatives to Congress to restrict slavery out west. And what do? They force slavery down the throat of a Free Soiler. And so this is a picture of senators. The African American or black gentleman is being shoved down the throat of the Free Soiler by the people that we vote for. We vote for them and send them to office. If you can read the caption, the black or African American man is crying murder. He's being murdered. Like, you're murdered. You're murder. You can't kill me here. So. Talking about the death of the Whig Party. Slavery becomes such an issue that we're now going to see the destruction of one of the major parties. First, we want to talk about the Free Soil Party. Democrats have an issue. Okay, well, Northern Democrats have an issue. Okay, Northern Democrats are increasingly uncomfortable being in a party that is controlled by Southern Democrats, who most own slaves, and all are wanting to defend slavery or definitely protect it and aid in its expansion west. Again, the Northern point of view for anyone, Democrat, Whig, the Northern point of view is no slavery out west. And so for Northern Democrats, it's increasingly difficult to be a Democrat when the Northern opinion, the Northern mainstream opinion is no slavery out west, but your party's platforms, your party leaders keep fighting for compromise that allows slavery to expand west. Whig voters are upset because Northern Whigs are upset because the Whig Party is generally viewed as the anti-slavery party. However, when Whigs go to Congress, they join Democrats in compromising over slavery, and so Northern Whigs are incensed that we vote for Whigs who say they'll restrict slavery, then they go to Washington D.C. and compromise over it. So this is upsetting to them. Okay. So you see Northern Whigs, Northern Democrats start leaving the party, and we're starting to see some third parties during this era. One of those third parties is the Free Soil Party. Okay, free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. Free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. Okay. No slavery out west. Free soil ideology is just simply that. No slavery out west. Stop compromising over it. Northern workers, we shouldn't have to go out west and compete with slave labor. Right? The election of 1852. The election of 1852, Democrats are looking for a candidate that will appeal to both sides of the slavery issue, pro and anti-slavery. The problem is there's no more middle ground. There's no middle ground anymore. Northern Democrats will not nominate or vote for somebody that is anything less than no slavery out west. Southern Democrats will not vote for or nominate anyone who, you have to be willing to protect slavery. And so there's no more middle ground. And so Democrats were in trouble in 1852 as they look for a candidate that can somehow balance both sides of the party. Someone who is anti-slavery enough to appeal to Northern Democrats, and somebody that's pro-slavery enough to appeal to Southern Democrats. They managed to find somebody, Franklin Pierce, senator from New Hampshire, finally elected on the 49th ballot. When you read Senator Pierce, he's more concerned with the unity. So he talks a lot about unity. He tries, with the speeches, he tries to hem and haw. He doesn't have a lot of, he try to have the both, like Douglas, and a lot of Northern Democrats tried to have your cake and eat it too, like, appear pro-slavery enough, not pro-slavery enough, but less anti-slavery, so Southerners will find you palatable enough, and anti-slavery enough that Northerners would. He does support the Compromise of 1850, and he does support the Fugitive Slave Law. Whigs are in a lot of trouble. Northern Whigs are tired of a party where they vote for a Northern Whig representative, send him to Congress, and he compromises over slavery. After telling voters he won't compromise over slavery, he does. Southern Whigs are tired of being in an anti-slavery party. They nominate Winfield Scott, a war hero from the previous Mexican-American War. Winfield Scott stands on slavery. I'm a war hero. Winfield Scott stands on the tariff issue. I'm a war hero. Winfield Scott stands on whether we should have a northern or southern route for the Intercontinental Railroad. I'm a war hero. Whigs nominate Winfield Scott, a war hero, trying to recapture the magic of 1840 when the Whig Party nominated a war hero and won, William Henry Harrison, the greatest president in American history. So trying to recapture that magic here 12 years later. We'll nominate a war hero, and hopefully people will ignore all the other issues. This does not work. Northern Whigs, Southern Whigs abandon the party. Franklin Pierce will win the election of 1852. If you don't know a lot about Franklin Pierce, or you've never heard of him, or don't know a lot about him, don't worry. People at the time didn't know who he was either, and so you can. It's okay for you to be his lack of knowledge of him. People at the time didn't know who he was either. But anyways, and so this is a little joke there. We have some electoral realignment. As the Whig Party splits in two, shatters apart. Southern Whigs, either become Democrats or they just become homeless party-wise. Northern Whigs shatter into all kinds of different smaller groups. One party develops over the early 1850s called the American Party, or the Know Nothing Party. They're a nativist party that argues that a lot of the problems with America now in the 1850s is we've allowed too many non-Americans in. Remember, we talked about in a previous lecture, during this era, the early 1800s, Americans have developed a very specific definition of what an American is. Northern and Western European, mainly English, and Protestant. Well, the argument for the American Party is that we've let too many non-Americans in, and that's causing us our racial issues and other issues going on. They were called the Know Nothing Party, kind of as mocking. Whenever they started out as a secret society, and whenever they're asked about their meetings, they're supposed to say, "I know nothing." So therefore, the joke is they know nothing. We talked about the Free Soil, the Liberty Party before. They developed Free Soil Party, Anti-Slavery Party, Liberty Party. Is an abolitionist third party. And again, Northern Democrats increasingly are finding it difficult to maintain that balance. If you're a Northern Democrat, you cannot be pro-slavery. You won't win your election. If you're a Southern Democrat, you can't be anti-slavery. You'll lose. And so, if you want to win a national election, you need kind of votes both North and South, and so that becomes a very difficult tightrope to walk. Birth of the GOP. GOP is an anachronism. It's not used in the 1880s, but we've already had two other Republican parties, and so I just want to, kind of set it aside for you. We've had the Democratic Republicans. We've had the National Republicans. We'll now have just the Republican Party. This is the GOP, or the Grand Old Party. They'll get that nickname in the 1880s. There are two states that claim to be the birthplace of the Republican Party. Illinois, because of Abraham Lincoln, and then Michigan, because that's where the actual organization starts. Rip on Michigan, 1854. You start having meetings of dissatisfied Whigs, dissatisfied Democrats, and others who want to organize over opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. As the Whig Party no longer exists, and there's all kinds of other smaller groups, this new party has a convention in July of 1854 to run candidates for Congress to oppose the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This new party is a free soil party, no slavery out west. So it's going to attract a lot of free soilers, Northern Democrats, Whigs, American Party, all kinds of Northerners are going to come together and find that this new party, maybe this new party will resist the expansion of slavery, and that's kind of the difference. This new Republican Party is telling its voters, we won't compromise like the Whigs did. And so that's kind of the difference. What's there to do the Whigs is, the Whigs compromised over slavery too much. This new Republican Party makes the argument that we will not compromise over slavery like the Whigs did. The unifying goal is anti-slavery, no slavery out west. The Dred Scott decision is going to be viewed at the time as a major escalation in the unraveling of the country, the road to disunion. Dred Scott decision is going to be a major landmark to that road to disunion. Dred Scott is a man. He is a Missouri-born slave. Here's a painting of him, African American. Grew up in Missouri. His owner is an army doctor. His owner is an army doctor who spends a couple decades living in the North. Wisconsin Territory, Nebraska, kind of all over various postings in the North. So Dred Scott lives in the North for about 2 decades. While in the North, the doctor dies, and his will sends Scott back to Missouri to a relative. Scott's supporters are going to sue. Their legal standing. Dred Scott was free because he lived in the North. The idea is once you're in a state where slavery is illegal, you can't be a slave. It's illegal. You're free. And so the fact that Dred Scott lived for a couple decades in the North, for them, from this point of view, from his supporters' point of view, is that he should be free. It'll wind its way to the Supreme Court, eventually getting there. 5 of the 9 justices are Southern and several owned slaves, so that gives you kind of maybe an idea of how they're going to view the Dred Scott argument that, you know, I should be free based on because I've lived in the North where slavery is illegal for a couple of decades. The decision, so they could have left it, they could have just had a very narrow decision. It could have been a very narrow decision and just said, well, Scott is not a citizen of the United States, therefore he can't sue in court, and his supporters have no standing for him to sue in court because he's not a citizen of the United States. And so, you know, they could have left it at that, a very narrow ruling. It doesn't say anything about the compromises or Congress regulating slavery. So it could just very narrow, you know, African American slaves, they're not citizens, therefore, you know, they can't sue in court. But the Taney Court, Chief Justice Taney, T-A-N-E-Y, the Taney Court decides to take the decision one step further and argue that Congress and states cannot interfere with or regulate individuals' property rights. The Constitution protects each citizen's rights in the several states, meaning State A cannot tell a citizen of State B, you don't have property rights here. So a citizen's property rights are his property rights everywhere. The fact that he thinks black or African American people are property is irrelevant. If they're property in Georgia, then that should be respected everywhere. And so the Dred Scott decision argued that the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, all those personal liberty laws that are being passed are invalid. You can't, and even so far as state laws that actually abolish slavery by statute, such as New York, aren't valid. You can't regulate somebody's property rights out of existence, and so, from an abolitionist point of view, this is a horrible loss. Some abolitionists started seeing visions of slave auctions in Boston, you know, and then, you know, workers wanting to go west, you know, having to compete with African slave labor to find a job. Northerners are aghast. Northern editorial newspapers are aghast at this decision. Southerners Southern reaction from newspapers and letters and diaries is finally the U.S. government, or at least a branch of the U.S. government, is interested in maintaining some semblance of constitutional law to protect an individual's property rights, which for a lot of Southerners, the North has been violating for decades. Here's a drawing of the courtroom. 1858, the 1858 Senate race between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas. And this is the Illinois Senate race in 1858. Abraham Lincoln is a former Whig, no more Whig Party. Abraham Lincoln is a former Whig. He has joined this new Republican Party, and he is running for the U.S. Senate against Stephen A. Douglas, the incumbent. The Lincoln-Douglas debate, it's significant to historians because they like Lincoln, well, partly, but it's significant to historians because when you read the speeches in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, you get a very detailed view, a very panoramic, detailed view of how slavery intertwines, the issue of race intertwines with American politics at the time. When you read the speeches between Douglas and Lincoln, you really get a sense of, what did people in the United States think in 1850 about the issue of slavery. So you can read the Lincoln Douglas. It's in a book, just Lincoln Douglas debates. It's a book. You can go read it online too. Just look up Lincoln Douglas debates, and you really get a sense of what the political arguments were at the time. Some of Lincoln's most famous quotes come out of the Lincoln Douglas debates. Lincoln will lose. Lincoln will lose the Senate race in 1858. C.V. Douglas will be reelected by the state legislature. However, these Lincoln Douglas debates, the speeches are published nationally in newspapers, and these Lincoln Douglas debates will actually catapult Lincoln into national prominence, and he'll start to be viewed as a possible candidate for president because of his generally considered moderate anti-slavery views. And so we now go to John Brown's reign in the election of 1860. We've met John Brown before. He was in Bladen, Kansas. He's one of the reasons it was Bladen, Kansas. And we'll now go to what he did after Bladen, Kansas. John Brown is an abolitionist. He believes that slavery should be immediately emancipated. Slave owners should not be compensated for the loss of property. By 1858 and 59, John Brown believes that he has come up with an idea that will help free slaves. In Virginia, about 60 miles west of Washington, D.C., there is a federal arsenal where the U.S. government keeps its weapons in a small fort in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Lee hatches a plot that him and 20-odd other individuals will go to Harper's Ferry, will raid the fort, take the guns, and distribute it to the African American population in the region, and they will free themselves violently. In October of 1859, Lee's plot is hatched, and he is a group of about 20 people, including several of his sons, will take over the fort, which may be a little story or a little, I guess, says something about U.S. national security at the time. 20 guys to take over a federal arsenal. But they take over this federal arsenal. African American slaves do not show up to get their guns, but the Virginia State Militia does show up. There will be a couple-day gun battle siege as the Virginia State Militia, led by Robert E. Lee, soon to be famous in the Civil War. Robert E. Lee is head of the Virginia State Militia. He'll lead the Virginia State Militia to take over the fort. A lot of Brown's men will be killed. Brown himself will be severely wounded in the battle. So sick will Brown be, he will have to lay on a cot in the courtroom. So he'll be pretty sick during the trial. The trial is held in Harper's Ferry, which some would argue would make it not a fair trial. The trial is held, in the city, pulled off the raid. He will be found guilty of murder, sedition, some other things. And once he recovers from his wounds, his gunshot wounds, he will be hung in December of 1859. To some Northerners, he's a savior. He died just like Jesus died for America's sins. Just like Jesus died for our sins. John Brown died for America's sin of slavery. Some abolitionists view John Brown as a hero, a savior. A lot of Northern editorials condemn John Brown's reign as a dangerous and violent escalation. Remember, anti-slavery doesn't believe in violence to end slavery. and John Brown's raid was an attempt to start a slave insurrection. And so a lot of the mainstream Northern opinion was that this was not a good thing. Abraham Lincoln condemned John Brown's raid. Interesting story. Frederick Douglass, the African American or black abolitionist that we met in the previous lecture, he actually was friends with John Brown. John Brown actually approached him while he was planning the raid. John Brown actually approached Frederick Douglass to get his support. Frederick Douglass told him to get out. Like, no. Frederick Douglass didn't even want part of this. He's like, that's a dangerous escalation of violence. And so yes, Frederick Douglass actually, he knew what was going to happen before it happened because he got told. John Brown actually told him. He kept it quiet until it was pulled off. But so that's interesting. So now we have the election of 1860. Just like the Whig Party gets wiped out 8 years earlier. The Democrat Party is finally splitting in two. Slavery is catching up. They have one convention. I probably should have had this in reverse. The first convention, Stephen A. Douglas. Okay. Stephen A. Douglas is nominated for the presidency. Again, it's gotten to the point where Northern Democrats will not vote for or nominate a candidate that is pro-slavery in any way. You have to be anti-slavery. Well, you'll lose in the South. And in the South, they will not vote for anyone or vote to nominate anyone who is not willing to protect the expansion, the slavery as an institution, but also an expansion west. So the Democrat Party is finally going to be split in two. They're now in danger of becoming the Whig Party. Okay. Northern Democrats in the first convention, Stephen A. Douglas is nominated. Southern Democrats walk out of the convention. Stephen A. Douglas is anti-slavery. Everyone knows it. No matter how much Stephen A. Douglas is willing to compromise over slavery, he's not pro-slavery enough. He's not willing to protect it out west. Okay. And so Southern Democrats walk out of that first convention. We're not accepting Stephen A. Douglas. He's not pro-slavery enough. And Stephen A. Douglas can't be. Stephen A. Douglas is anti-slavery, even though he constantly compromises over slavery. He personally is anti-slavery, and he knows he's a good politician. He knows that he can't win an election in the North and espouse pro-slavery views. He won't win, right? And so they have a few months later. They'll actually have another convention to try to, okay, let's keep this together. The second convention, a few months later, nominates John Breckinridge, a U.S. Senator. What is John Breckinridge's stand on slavery? He owned slaves. John Breckinridge is nominated, and Northern Democrats walk out. Northern Democrats are like, you're a candidate for office who owned slaves by 1860. You're not going to be voting for the... Yeah, sure. Back in the 1830s, 1830s, Andrew Jackson owned slaves. It didn't hurt him. He still won. But this isn't the 1830s anymore. 1860, a candidate that outright owned slaves is not going to win in the North. Northerners are not going to vote for that. Okay. The mainstream Northern opinion is anti-slavery. No slavery out west. So if you're a slave owner and you're vocally committed to expanding slavery out west, you just can't win. Northern Democrats walk out of the convention. Breckinridge will lose. Breckinridge is a loser in the North. Just like Southerners walk out for Douglas. Douglas is a loser in the South. Douglas won't win in the South. Breckinridge won't win in the North. So it appears as we go into the election that just like the Whig Party gets blown apart, it looks like the Democrat Party is headed that way as well. There is a third party, the Constitutional Union Party. Their main political platform is, can't we just all get along? They want to return to the days of compromise. They nominate John Bell, a senator from Tennessee, congressman from Tennessee. And John Bell, that's his stand. Let's go back to where we could compromise. The problem is American culture has moved beyond that. We're not willing to compromise anymore. No more compromising. Okay. The Republican Party has an issue. They do not exist in the South. You've got to win a national election while not existing in the South. That's tough. That's tough. Okay. The reason Abraham Lincoln wins the nomination is he's considered a moderate on slavery. He is anti-slavery. No slavery out west. He's considered moderate enough that Republicans are hoping that he'll win either A, win enough votes in the North that he won't need the South, or moderate enough that maybe some Southerners will vote for him. All right. Before we go to the election results, I want you to keep in mind that Lincoln's name did not appear on the ballot in 10 Southern states. 10 states didn't even have Lincoln's name on the ballot. Okay, so when we go to the results, keep that in mind. Okay. Abraham Lincoln wins 40% of the popular vote. Okay. Well, we don't care about the popular vote. We're not a direct democracy, fortunately. We're a constitutional republic. And so we care more about the electoral vote. And so Abraham Lincoln wins 180 electoral votes, which is a majority. Okay. So Lincoln is blue here. He should be blue here. I'm sorry for the mix-up, but the 39.9% corresponds to the 180. Those should both be blue. So keep that in mind. You did not appear in 10 Southern state ballots. You still won the election with 180 electoral votes. You won enough states to win a majority of the Electoral College, and you won 40% of the popular vote. Okay. Pretend you're a Southern a Southern slave owner, or a Southerner who thinks that slavery should be allowed to exist. What did this demonstrate? For a lot of Southerners, the Republican Party is an abolitionist party. For a lot of Southerners, Abraham Lincoln is a rabid abolitionist. Okay? They ignore all the evidence that he's a moderate on slavery. He's willing to compromise over slavery. No. Okay. To Southerners, he's a rabid abolitionist, just like John Brown. It doesn't matter that Lincoln condemned John Brown's raid. That doesn't even matter. No. He is a rabid abolitionist, just like John Brown. Doesn't matter that he condemned John Brown's raid. Doesn't matter that there are speeches. He's given plenty of speeches. He makes clear his attitude. He's no slavery out west. Okay. From December of 1860 to February of 1861, so about 3 months between December and February, 7 states don't even want to know what a Lincoln presidency will be like. They don't even know what a Republican presidency want to be. We don't want to know. They leave. South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas leave the Union. They don't even want to know what a Lincoln presidency will be like. Okay. I want you to notice a couple of other things that's not talked to you about in the popular history. Number one, when you read a lot of editorials during the winter of 1860-61, a lot of northern editorials, their attitude about these 7 states leaving is let them leave. They'll come back after a while. What I think you should find interesting as a student of history is there's no call yet. There's no calls for war, or very little no calls for war to bring the states back. The common attitude for a lot of Northerners, when you read the letters, the diaries, the editorials, the speeches is, let them leave. They're leaving peacefully. They'll come back. We'll find a way to compromise at some point. And so that's the first thing I want you to notice is the simple act of 7 states nullifying the doctrine of nullification, nullifying their ratification of the U.S. Constitution. You don't see calls for war to bring them back at this point. Most what you hear is let them leave. They're upset. We'll compromise later. We'll talk later. So I want students to notice that the first thing is the initial act of just leaving doesn't cause a war. You're not shooting yet. The other thing to notice is this is the doctrine of nullification in action. Right? We talked about the doctrine of nullification over the course of the semester. You have these 7 states. Remember, they're arguing that what? We as a state have a right to override federal law if we deem it unconstitutional. These southern states are arguing, and when you read, you hopefully have already read, but if you're reading those Declaration of Causes, what are these states saying? The northern states have constantly and consistently violated the U.S. Constitution for at least a decade, if not 2, if not 3. I mean, just consistently violated the rights of southern property holders, and so from their point of view, they're leaving because the North has violated the Union, the Compact of Union. The North has violated that, and so we're leaving. That's the Southern argument is the Union can be dissolved if a part of the Union, the North, is constantly violating the U.S. Constitution. Then yes, we can leave the Union. Okay, so that's the doctrine of nullification. This idea that it's a union, but yes, of course we can leave it. And of course the northern point of view is like Lincoln and a lot of Northerners. There's no clause it is a union. There's no clause in the Constitution that says you can leave. There's no process in the Constitution by which a state can leave. You're in the union, it's a union. Right? And so you see that tension finally coming to head. We talked about it a few times over the course of the semester. You're finally seeing it come to a head. Okay? What is the definition of union? What is the definition of union? Who is supreme in the federal government? Is it the federal government or is it the state? Or who is supreme in the union? Is it the federal government or is it the states? Right? And so you have that. That is about to be answered. Right? It's about to be. Lincoln and the Union Army will spend 4 years answering the question of what union is. But I want you to notice that first here, we don't see calls for war to preserve the Union early on. Between December of 1860 and February of 1861, when these 7 states leave the Union, or nullify their ratification of the U.S. Constitution, the doctrine of nullification, there's not this cry to bring them back. The general attitude is let them leave. We'll talk later. And what do you notice? That's the general northern view about slavery. Anti-slavery. No violence, no social chaos, and no violence ends slavery. Fine. Leave the Union. That's better than war. Okay. At least at this point. Okay. I wanted to show you this little. This is a picture of the primary document, Charleston Mercury Extra. Union is dissolved. So in South Carolina, it leaves the Union in December of 1860. You see here, the Charleston Mercury is extra. I don't know if you can read that, but if you read the small print, that's the actual resolution. the actual nullification ordinance. And then South Carolina the South Carolina state legislature will then type up or print up a document, write up a document, detailing why they left the Union. By February 1st, 1861, 7 states had left the Union. February 7th, the 7 states sent delegates to a convention in Mobile, Alabama, to adopt a constitution for the Confederate States of America and elect Jefferson Davis as president of the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis was a senator from Mississippi before being promoted to the office of president of the Confederate States of America. Confederate, interesting, harkening back to the Articles of Confederation, the Confederate States of America. What is the definition of union? What is the definition of union? Going back to the Articles of Confederation, what does the first line say? We, the independent and sovereign states of the United States of America. Interesting. So going back to this idea of it's a confederation, the Confederate States of America. So it tells you something about these 7 states and what they consider to be the Union. We can leave the Union. We're a confederation of independent and sovereign states. Of course we can leave the Union. Okay. And then the other point of view is we're a union. You can't leave. We're a union. There's no clause in the Constitution by which you can leave. There's no process. You're in the Union. And then what's happened over the last decades? Clearly, over the last decade, the federal government has exerted supremacy over state governments. And so you've seen that so far over the course of the early 1800s, the federal government kind of expanding its power, its reach. And so for the Union point of view is that the federal government is supreme, not the states. Okay? And you can't leave. If slavery is an issue, it is interesting to note that if you look at the top 7 states by slave population, and even total black population, the 7 states to leave the Union are 1 through 7, almost in the order. And so I would argue that that's not a coincidence. Is slavery an issue in the Civil War? Yes. The fact that the states with the highest concentration, the highest population of slaves, happen to be the first 7 to leave. In fact, in 2 of those states, there will be more African American individuals than white people or European Americans. South Carolina and Mississippi will have more African American than European American citizens, free and slave. So it's interesting to note that they're the first 2 to leave. Okay, that concludes lecture 19, Sectionalism. Thank you. Bye.